So welcome to my YouTube channel, Daktari. I'm Kinyanjui wa Kibara. Karibuni my fans. Leo tutapiga story na mrembo ako hapa. She's well traveled, amesoma kiasi. But atatuambia amesoma how much mwenyewe and what she does because I believe what she has not many people know, so let's keep it rolling. Karibu.
Asante.
So tutajiintroduce.
Yes.
Okay.
Naitwa Dr. Lydia Muthuma. Mimi si mkaaji wa Nakuru, although I'd love to be.
Yeah.
Naishi Nairobi and I studied uchoraji. I started off with a Bachelor of Education in Fine Art, and then I did a master's in History of Art, and eventually I did a doctorate. I was studying Nairobi. What I really like is to read the stories of people from the artwork that they have created. So I look at a city as if it's artwork. Ni kama mchoro. Sana angalia hapa walichora nini, siku gani, mwaka gani, kwa sababu gani. So that's what I study.
By artwork you mean monuments or buildings or what?
I mean buildings, I mean monuments, I mean streets, I mean gardens, I mean anything that human beings do with the intention of that activity or that action outlasting them. Nikijenga nyumba, nijenge nyumba nzuri, I want to leave it behind so that it talks about me. That's what I'm calling artwork.
So from your perspective, what is Nairobi?
Wow, that's a tough question. Nairobi, it is the capital of Kenya. It is a city, mega city, all those things. But sana sana, Nairobi is the life of the people who have occupied that space. And they have been varied because Nairobi, well, they tell us it's been in existence from 1899, but that is when the European came to Nairobi.
Right.
Before that, it was still there. The Maasais were there. The Kikuyus and the Kambas used to operate a market around now it's Dagoretti Corner. So Nairobi is a place that has housed people for a long time. At any given time in history, maisha ya wale ambao wanakaa huko, that's what I call Nairobi.
So what will the history of Nairobi, for instance, teach us? How will it benefit ordinary people?
You know, it is very important to know your environment, your physical environment. And you see, you don't live in that place. You don't drop down from heaven, from the skies. You're given space to occupy and you live there. No, there are people who lived there before you. And there are things they left for you. There are things they did well or maybe did not do so well. Or things that were indifferent. They just did them. Unazikuta hapo zinakusubiri. So those things affect your life. So we fashion ourselves according to the things that are around us. If you drop me today in the middle of Masai Mara, it's not the same as putting me in Nairobi. I'm the same Lydia, but I will have a different flavor, a different accent, a different approach to things. So that's how history helps us.
Yeah, but dropping you today will be like very different also, like during the days when the Maasai was occupying it, isn't it?
Yes, because the people who occupy and shape that place, they change as time goes on. So Nairobi has not been one thing all the time. No. The Nairobi of 1930s is not the Nairobi of 2022.
So give us a brief history of the history, maybe the evolution of Nairobi.
If you're my viewer, I think you are going to feel sorry for me because my interviewer is asking me very tough questions, but let me try. Nairobi is this place where the Maasai community watered their cows. In fact, it's called, I don't know how to pronounce it in Kimasai, but current Nairobi would be closest. And it refers to the swamp that is on Nairobi River. From about University of Nairobi or the museum place, going all the way to Globe Roundabout. Afterwards, you can look at the map. That place used to have a swamp, and that's where the Maasais would stop there and water, get their cows to drink, to refresh themselves, and then continue. Because you know, if you're a pastoralist, you're always chasing grass.
Yes.
So that's how it started off. And in fact, that's where the name Nairobi comes from. Now, when the British came to East Africa, they were very interested in finding out the source of River Nile, because it's a long story, but let me see if I can make it very short. The Suez Canal has just been opened in 1869. Opening the Suez Canal means you shorten the distance between Europe and Asia. Because what you do is you go to the Mediterranean Sea, cross the Suez Canal, you find yourself in the Red Sea, and voila, you're in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, and down there you're in Africa.
Yes, but now
East
compare, yes, compare that to going around the Atlantic Ocean all the way down to South Africa and coming up the Indian Ocean. So the Suez Canal changed everything. However, to keep that canal going, you need the waters of River Nile. So of course, the powers then, the political powers realized whoever controls the Nile is going to control trade between Europe and Asia. So it became very important to find the source of the Nile. The Germans, the British, the French, everybody wanted this source of the Nile. The British are the ones who came they followed the Nile. Like everybody else, they tried to follow it from Egypt, Sudan, but there are many cataracts. So they had to go the sea way. So they came from Mombasa and wanted, or rather, created a railway line from Mombasa all the way to Kisumu. When you get to Nairobi, they found that the natural stopping point, because you need to stop there to decide how the railway is going to go up Limuru, down deep into the Rift Valley, up again. So they stopped in Nairobi to reassess their issues. And also remember the swamp that we were talking about?
Yes.
The fact that there's fresh water around, it was a good stopping place. So eventually from that, Nairobi became the administrative center. So when the colonial masters followed the traders, they appointed it, they made it the capital, and it became the capital of British East Africa. It was the leading colonial city, colonial town. East Africa was governed from Nairobi. And lots of funds were put into Nairobi, into growing Nairobi to be an important colonial city. It is the same Nairobi that was made the capital of independent Kenya. And I think now I'm getting beyond the story. I'm giving too many.
No, that is what we want to hear.
Okay.
One will wonder so that Mombasa, which is much an older city, and the railway started there.
Yes.
How come Nairobi overtook it in becoming the most important town in Kenya?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. Actually, at first, any government would start at the coast, and they wouldn't even start in Mombasa, they would start in Zanzibar, because the powers that be at that time were the Omani Arabs, and they had put their sultanate, the capital was in Zanzibar. So the diplomats, the foreign European powers, they all stopped in Zanzibar. Shortly after that, they translated themselves to Mombasa. So Mombasa was the capital. However, if you want to colonize the whole of Kenya plus Uganda, because that's what made up British East Africa, it's very difficult to rule from the coast. You'll not know what is happening in Entebbe, in Fort Portal, in Jinja, in Meru, so Nairobi
So
was
the
more
centrality
central.
of it.
Yes,
Oh.
that's what decided the place.
So the colonialists settled there, and what next happened?
What next happened?
They poured money there, like you said, and they decided to make it their headquarters.
Yes, but
And from a swamp place, how did it develop into the metropolis that we see today?
you have the railways to thank for that. They started off as the Uganda Railways. When the line was being constructed, it was the Uganda Railways. They are the ones who appointed Nairobi as their administrative capital. So the British colonial government did not see the need for creating another capital. You go to where the line of communication is. Previously, they had sent their sub-commissioner to Machakos. The railway line, the standard gauge, does not pass by Machakos. It bypasses Machakos. So the British colonial government followed the railway and went to Nairobi. Because it was the capital of the railway line, and the railway line is what was making money. Remember, they were getting goods, agricultural produce from all over East Africa, taking it to Mombasa in order to ship it abroad.
Yeah.
So Nairobi became the clearing place, the forwarding place. Even small companies in Uganda would bother to open an office in Nairobi. To this day, you have a building in Nairobi called Uganda House. And people ask me, why is it called Uganda House? Because the people of Uganda needed to transport their goods from Nairobi.
Oh, I also have been wondering, by the way.
That's how it happened to be there.
Ugandans used to operate from Nairobi.
Now, British East Africa was not Kenya only. It was Kenya and Uganda.
Okay.
But Uganda had, first of all, the climate around Lake Victoria is not good for the Europeans because of the mosquitoes. They don't have resistance to it. So they were not very interested in settling around Lake Victoria, although it is the source of the Nile. And also, Uganda had the Kabaka system, had a government which they realized was going to be a bit problematic. It was going to be challenging to unsettle it. So what they did is they had a different pact with Uganda. Uganda became a protectorate where you rule more indirectly. Now, Kenya has not always, the borders have not always been where we know them to be. The border was along Naivasha. But once the railway line went up to Kisumu, the British government thought, no. It's easier to manage this railway line if it's under one country. So the border was moved from Naivasha and it went all the way to Mount Elgon.
Okay.
So suddenly Kenya became a bit bigger. But up to Mount Elgon, that's where the border is up to today. So Uganda remained as a protectorate. And as the word suggests, you're sort of protecting that kingdom with its peoples. The story of Kenya didn't go that way. Kenya in 1920 became crown colony. Crown colony means you're the you're the property of the king or queen of United Kingdom. So Kenya was a colony, not a protectorate. Kenya was part and parcel of the United Kingdom. Uganda was not quite that. So yes, Ugandans did business through Kenya because, as you can see, Nairobi was like a little London. If you want telegraph, if you want radio, if you want fast communication, it has always been Nairobi, not Kampala, not Entebbe, not... Let me give you an example.
Okay.
As late as 1994, when the Rwanda genocide happened, if you are a journalist and you go there for a story, you could not upload it from Rwanda. You had to come to Nairobi because that's where there was satellite. So Nairobi has always had, because of its history, it has always had that preeminence, very swift and good communication. So yes, the Ugandans would do business through there, and Greater East Africa would do business through Nairobi.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Muthuma.
Yes.
Now that you mentioned Uganda House, which is it one of the city monuments, by the way?
No, it is not considered a monument because, you know, the ones who appoint monuments are the museum and part of the Architectural Society of Kenya, and they say that the building lacks architectural merit, but it has historical merit.
Yeah, so maybe tell us a bit more about the interesting monuments that we see today and what story they tell.
Perhaps we can start with the Galton Monument.
Where is it?
It is in Nairobi. It's on Koinange Street, where that street intersects with Kenyatta Avenue, right in the middle there. And it's like a sphere, like a globe made out of concrete, and then it's attached to the ground. Now, it has the equator line, like you'd find on a globe, and then it has distances marked with the directions. So it will tell you Nairobi to Kigali, X number of kilometers. Nairobi to Mombasa, X number of kilometers. Now, that round globe marks point 0, where the measuring of the distance starts. So when you say, from Nairobi to Dar es Salaam is 500 or whatever number of kilometers, from what edge of Nairobi? You actually mean from that globe that is at the intersection of Koinange Street and Kenyatta Avenue. So that would be one of the monuments, and it's called the Galton Memorial because it's in remembrance of those two brothers that belong to that family who loved motor racing. So they did a lot of, they are the precursors of our safari rally. So they would drive all over East Africa when the roads were quite rudimentary. Most of them were not tarmac, but that's what they would do. And they would go out mapping the area and giving the mileage and then kilometers. So that's an example of a monument in Nairobi.
So the road is this one that ends at Koinange Street.
Okay, Koinange Street starts from University of Nairobi, that's north. If you're going in a south direction, it will end at Cardinal Otunga Plaza. That's Koinange Street.
Yeah.
Kenyatta Avenue begins from New Stanley Hotel and it goes towards Serena Hotel. Now where those two roads meet, that's where you find Galton Fenzi. It is near the General Post Office, that bus stop there.
So what's the story? What story does it tell?
The Galton Fenzi Memorial.
Yeah.
It's a story of those two brothers who used to travel all over, but more importantly, it marks point 0, the point from which you count kilometers or miles. When you say from Nairobi to Kericho is 300 kilometers. Nairobi is 684 square kilometers. So at what point does that mileage begin? It begins where that globe is attached to the ground.
Yeah, but one will wonder why that particular spot?
Well, before that, it was actually a few meters to the west, and that's where the government, the British government, used to operate from. That little building that is called, today I think it's Nairobi Gallery. It was built in 1913. It's opposite Uganda House. Now that building, the government carried out its activities from there. In fact, the original name was the Ministry for Native Affairs. You see, if you have come to colonize a country, you have different ministries. The one for Native Affairs was housed there. That's where the colonials would record the births, the deaths, all those things. That was the place where point 0 was marked from, because government operated from there. But because it was not very practical to have a huge round globe in the middle of a government office, it was moved outdoors and further to the east.
Like you said, like 50 meters?
Yeah, about.
Oh,
yeah.
that is the reason.
Yes.
Okay. Which other monument is significant?
Oh, there are many monuments that are significant, but let's keep on the same street.
Yeah.
No, let's go south. I don't know how well you know your geography, but assume that University of Nairobi is to the north, the railway station is to the south, Serena Hotel is to the west, and River Road is to your east.
Exactly.
All right. Now let's go towards the south. When you come to the Parliament, present day Parliament, and the Supreme Court, there's a space there that looks a bit empty. We put in cars there, it's a parking place.
It's a parking.
Yes.
Yeah, very empty.
And there are many flags.
Yes.
Now that place is called City Square.
Yes.
And the middle of that space has a statue of Jomo Kenyatta. You know, he's seated there on a tall podium, for want of a better word.
Yes.
He's seated there facing Parliament. And behind him, there's the Supreme Court. We gave it the name Supreme Court recently. Before that, it was the High Court, especially to the British. So, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta is seated there, telling you that he's governing the nation from there. That's why he's facing Parliament. He's facing the important institutions. But much more important than that is that that spot where Kenyatta is the very same spot where the head of the British Empire stood. And this was King George V. He stood there facing what later would become King George VI Memorial Hospital. It's in the same direction. So, you know, this is like a language of that space. It's telling you, I am your king, here I stand, and these are the lands that I command. So that is what is interesting about that monument. Unfortunately, you will not be able to see that monument of King George the Fifth, because it has been pulled down. And I have never seen it.
Okay.
These are things that happened before I was born. But I have seen a photograph of it coming down. That statue of Kenyatta seems to be a bit interesting to Kenyans, because many school parties go to visit it. I think it's part of their civic education. They come there, they are told this is the High Court, this is the Supreme Court, this is the Kenyatta International Conference Center, which culturally has been very important for the country. And I think they usually come in from the Parliament, they're shown where Parliament is. It's a way of educating our the younger nation.
And monuments play a great role in that. How did the King George's statue have to come to be there, from the little you know maybe?
King George's statue was installed there by the British government. They wanted Nairobi to look grand. They wanted to give Nairobi importance. You know, if I tell you in words don't carry too much weight. If I use the language of the space and I fabricate a statue and place it there, you know, you have to see it. You almost have to salute. Yes, sir, I am here. And in fact, what they used to do was to carry out the parades there.
Okay.
For example, Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, that was during the Second World War. Kenya participated, and you had battalions of soldiers marching up and down that statue, that city square. So it was operational, it used to work. And if anybody came to visit, you know the way President Uhuru Kenyatta anakagua gwaride la heshima, that would happen in front of the statue of King George V.
Very deep symbolism.
Yes, and you're not talking about Kenya only. Kenya was a part of the British Empire.
Right.
So the head of the British Empire was not the colonial governor, it was the king in the UK.
Okay.
That's why you needed him there.
So, and you said something about the statue of Kenyatta, which came up later facing Parliament, with its back to the High Court, Supreme Court rather. So, would you know which direction that one of King George was facing, and why was he standing and Kenyatta was sitting? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Okay, King George was facing the same direction that Mzee Jomo Kenyatta faces. Now, imagine you're the British government and you have put up a building that symbolizes and actually operationalizes your motto. You know the way our motto as a country at first was Harambee,
Yes.
then it became peace, love, unity.
Yeah.
Then after that, I think we dropped the idea of the motto. For the British, it was law and order. So to build a high court, that is the message, the symbol of why they are governing the country, the style in which they're governing the country. They were here to establish law and order. So the High Court becomes not just a building for administering justice, it's also a building that says who and what the government is. Now imagine if you made King George face that building, there'd be no more conversation. The conversation would be between King George and the building. No, so you turn him around so that he faces out. He's talking to all the people he has colonized. And whatever is behind him, that law and order building, those are his instruments of power. You do not face your instrument of power, you face the people using your instrument of power. So had I been the one, I would also have made him face the same direction.
Wow.
When Kenyatta came, he faced the same direction. And I think some people like to add that it was also to show that the executive is way above the ordinary law. Yes.
And like nothing much changed apart from the color of the ruler.
No, a lot changed. The style of ruling changed because before, King George lived in the UK. Kenyatta lived in Kenya. He was a son of this soil. And I find this very interesting. You asked me why he's seated and King George was standing.
Yes.
King George is wearing military clothes. He's standing there as a commander-in-chief. To come and colonize people, you don't come and say, could I colonize you? No, no, no. You come with an AK-47 and it's business.
Ready for war.
Yes, you're leading your troops to battle. Kenyatta didn't have to do that. He's not holding a gun. He's not, in fact, he's dressed in a very interesting clothes. He's actually...
Very kingly, more than the king actually.
People find them kingly, but if you scrutinize them, he's wearing the robes of the chancellor of the university.
Oh, wow.
So he had, at that point, he was the chancellor of University of Nairobi. And I think the person who crafted that monument, the artist, the sculptor, was British. And to the British, I think it meant a lot that Kenyatta had gone to school in the UK, had written a very good dissertation, and a supervisor who only took the best students. His name was Malinowski. Kenyatta managed to secure that supervisor, and his work was so good, it was later published. It's the one we call Facing Mount Kenya. So I think in acknowledgement of his academic prowess, the sculptor wanted to include that he's the leader of the educated. However, that message doesn't work the other way around, because for Kenyans, very few know that he was the chancellor of the university, and it means very little to them.
Exactly.
What is important is that he was the father of the nation.
Yes.
But you see, this is when he sees yule ambaye anatengeneza hiyo sanamu, he's not from the country, so they are a bit different from the people who live in the country. So it's not just the color or the sanamu that changed. The receiving audience, the message that is being given, and the style in which it's being given, all that changed.
Now, Dr. Muthuma, I think the history of Nairobi cannot be complete without the mention of Jiwanji Gardens. what can you tell us about it that is maybe not in the public realm per se?
Well, let me see. You see, the question of the Asians in Kenya, I find it very interesting. I know a few who are third generation Kenyans. They have not set foot in India. They were born in Kenya.
Yes.
Their parents were born in Kenya. Maybe their grandparents and great grandparents traveled from Kenya and came to India. For some reason, they are always a bit apart. Up to today, you have the Indians, well, the Asians, we call them all Indians.
Yes.
You have the Asians, you have the Africans, and you had the British.
Yes.
It was very clear where the British belonged and very clear where the black Africans belonged. Where the Indians belonged was always not very clear. They were being governed.
About the boundaries of Nairobi or the social strata of Kenya at that time?
The social strata, which was also reflected in the boundary.
Yes.
For instance, in Nairobi, if you take the central business district as a boundary, the Europeans lived in the west,
Yes.
Westlands,
Westlands.
Kilimani, all that area.
Yes.
The Africans lived in the east.
Islando.
Yes, Eastlando, that's where the name comes from.
Yeah.
So you are Jerusalem, Makongeni, all that was Eastland, Shauri Moyo, Pumwani, Majengo. The Indians were like the buffer zone. They occupied the space between those two. So there would be a ring around central business district. You know what we call River Road in general?
Yes.
There's River Road
Ngara.
and what Ngara, all that was
Kariako.
Indian area, Karioko. Later on they spilled over into Parklands. But originally they
Yes.
were sandwiched there.
Okay.
So the social strata was translated into the spatial organization.
So you mean the settlement were deliberately created according to races?
Nairobi was very segregated, more segregated than South Africa. And in fact, the early town planners were from South Africa. So you can see where the plan came from.
So was there an element, I've heard this before, I don't know whether it's just been hogwash, is there an element of Illuminati and Freemasonry in the building of Nairobi?
I have heard those stories, but I have not been able to verify them. So it's difficult to say. Yes, I heard people talk about them. There's a building near Serena Hotel, and then there's a church, I think St. Andrews, but I have never been able to verify. So I'm afraid I cannot tell you much there.
So if we go to Nairobi today, there's a, what is the biggest landmark? Because there's a time Kenyatta International Conference Center was dominant, but now there's, with the landscape changing,
There's Times Tower.
yeah, I don't know, what can you say about the changes and let's say the reduction of the importance of KICC?
Oh, I don't look at it as a reduction. That's an interesting one. Anyway, what is happening?
Okay, maybe being dwarfed. would be the word.
You mean reduction in size? Okay. Now, what is happening is that the city itself is growing, not just in outward spread, but also in intensity of business. So central business district is becoming too small. So what has happened is that finance has moved out of central business district.
Yes.
It has gone to Upper Hill.
Yeah.
Upper Hill is where you'll have the Coca-Cola building, Old Mutual, the Kenya Commercial Bank. Anybody who has money will have their huge office in
It's the new
Upper
CBD.
Hill. It is not just CBD, it's very specifically for finance.
Yes.
Equity
Oh.
will be there. It's a financial capital.
Oh, okay.
Now with that move, keep in mind that Upper Hill is not called Upper Hill for the sake of just giving a name. It's actually higher than CBD. CBD is lower. So whatever building you put up there is necessarily going to be taller. So Rahim Tula Towers, whatever buildings you have even UAP, I think it stands for United and Prudential, UAP Insurance, they have very tall buildings, so they automatically dwarf your Kenyatta International Conference Center. So the dwarfing, first of all, it shows you that capital, the finance, is too much to be contained in your traditional CBD. It has moved to higher ground, to Upper Hill. KICC has been dwarfed, but I think it still retained a kind of, it marks a specific history of Nairobi, specific in terms of years. 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, KICC was the symbol. Now the symbolism is changing because once Times Tower was put up right next to KICC, now between 35 stories high and KICC is 29, 26, 27, the difference already begins to dwarf it down. And now the parliament, where they have put up some other towers, because they are very close to KICC, they also tend to dwarf KICC. But the monument I would single out, maybe we don't think of it as a monument, is the expressway. It has totally reconfigured the visuals in Nairobi. It looks like a different town.
Okay.
Yes.
In terms of, is it from space or how has it made it different?
You see, suddenly you have a lower deck and an upper deck. The lower deck, traffic in Nairobi is a nightmare. It is chaotic. To move from Westlands to Nairobi, to the city center, can take you half an hour, 20 minutes, yet it's walking distance. When you're on the expressway, from Westlands to Mlolongo, takes you 20 minutes. From city center to the airport, can take you 15 minutes. That is to change speed in an unprecedented way. And then also, when you're cruising up there on the top deck, you know, you have all the time to view the busy life of Nairobi down there. You know, you're up there where you breathe the air together with Rahimtula Towers or with UAP, people on the 35th floor of Times Tower. You mix with that kind of crowd. In fact, it's like a cruise. You know, when you go on a cruise ship, that's a feeling you get on the expressway. It's truly express. Slow, arduous, exhausting business, it's done down there on the lower deck. That is how it has changed it. Ordinarily, we divide a city according to horizontal space. Now, we have something down there and something up there. So we're talking about vertical space and there are cars up there. So that's why I'm saying it has changed the dynamics.
And what do you think President Uhuru was doing when he was building that one? Was it a service he really wanted Kenyans to get, or a legacy, or a symbolism of some kind? Like, is it a monument, for example? What's your opinion?
I believe he was completing the projects that were begun by the late President Mwai Kibaki. President Mwai Kibaki was an excellent economist, and really business in Nairobi was beginning to stagnate. He had the foresight to see that, and therefore he started the Thika Superhighway. He drafted the expressway and the Lamu port. He wanted communication to be seamless. I think President Uhuru simply took over the designs of President Mwai Kibaki. So more than a legacy, he was simply following in the footsteps of somebody he realized is probably the best economist we'll ever have. I think deep down that was his reason.
So in your research for the history of Nairobi, let's go back to let's discuss the history of the architecture of Nairobi a bit. Is there any person who will say was the first person or a European to settle in Nairobi? Would you know?
They talk about Major Smith. He used to service the caravans. But before that, there was a fort. You've heard of Kabete?
Yes.
Now, that Kabete place That's where there was a fort, because when the first Europeans came, they followed the caravan route, and they wanted to stop
Which
near
caravan?
the route that
Slave
used
trade?
to sell slaves, and later on, once slavery was abolished, it sold elephant tusks, ivory.
Yes. Okay.
The road that was surveyed from Mombasa to Nairobi followed that road. We usually call it Sclater's Road.
Right.
Sclater's was a major who came from Nyasaland.
So where in Nairobi will you say they settled in today's geography?
In today's geography, the first place they went to was near Dagoretti Market.
Yeah.
But they were not given peace there at all by the people who were there. Their fort was just
Maasai.
destroyed. The Maasai, the Kikuyu, the Kambas. It was a place for market business. So they moved to Kabete. And that's where they put up a fort that they called Fort Smith. It was a building made out of mud and sticks, and they built like the locals around them, thatched with grass. That was a Fort Smith. So that's where the first officers of the Imperial British East Africa lived. Have you heard of somebody like Fort Hall?
Yes.
Fort Hall is a place, Moranga.
Yes.
Now, Hall was somebody's name. Okay. He first worked in Fort Smith before he went to Fort Hall.
Fort Smith is which one?
Fort Smith is Kabete.
Oh, okay. Now I
Yes,
get
where
it.
Kabete Polytechnic stands, Kabete School, that is where the fort was.
Okay.
The railway changed all that because instead of putting up a station near Kabete, they preferred where the swamp was. They preferred the current railway
So
station.
who between the swamp settlers and the ones who were just away from maybe Dagoretti, who came before the other?
The ones who settled in Dagoretti came before.
Okay.
They were followed by the ones who built the railway, because actually the Imperial British East Africa Company went bankrupt. And the ones who inherited their business were the builders of the railway.
Oh, okay. So something about the evolution of the architecture of Nairobi?
At first, people built according to the local custom. They built the way they found the Maasai and the Maasai not so much, a Kikuyu building. Because as Maasais are pastoralists, their manyattas were not close there. The Kikuyus lived there. Nairobi doesn't sound like a Kikuyu place, but when you follow the place names, you realize, because a name like Kitisuru is from Gitadhuru.
Oh.
A name like Muthaiga, that's a Kikuyu name, it's not a Maasai name. A name like Madhari, it's also Kikuyu. So that part was Kikuyu land. What was Maasai land was more eastlands and the southern part. So they built like the Kikuyus. The Fort Smith, if you see a photograph of it, you can get it online. It looks like a Kikuyu square hut. The Kikuyu ones were round. Okay. So that's how they started building. With time, they imported the style of building that they saw in their country. So once the railways came in, they started building using stone, roofing that is designed.
You're talking about the Africans, architecture.
The original buildings that the British built,
Yes.
they imitated Kikuyu African buildings.
Oh.
Made out of mud, like huts, but instead of being round, they made them rectangle.
Do they still exist now? Are there samples?
Fort Smith was pulled down, no.
Oh.
Because mud in itself does not last more than one person's lifetime. What you would find are mud brick buildings. Those ones still exist. When you take the soil and make bricks out of it,
Yes.
a building like St. Austin's in Lavington,
Yes.
not the church, but the parish house,
Yes.
the parish hall, it's built out of those bricks, mud bricks.
Wow,
So
wow.
it's a technology that is similar to.
So they made them square, and then?
With time, they started building exactly as they did in the UK. There's a building near State House opposite All Saints Cathedral. First of all Saints Cathedral, there's nothing Kenyan about its architecture. It's a breed between Romanesque and Gothic building. Then the other building I'm talking about that is opposite, when you look at that roof is for draining snow. In the tropics, you don't need a roof like that.
Wow.
But they built like that because where they came from, a roof had to be very steep.
Right.
And to be able to drain the snow. With time, things started to change. The slope became less. In fact, in the 50s, you had very many flat roofs, and people discovered the flat roofs are not working very well. So we went back to a slight slope. The building in the architectural heritage is eclectic. They are all styles and all types.
Do they still exist?
Yes, they do.
Which areas?
Okay, if you go to the Central Business District, near opposite Parliament, what we call the State Law Office, the AG's building.
Yes.
It has, I mean, you might overlook the building, but it has sunscreens, and in those sunscreens, there's a window that is a mogul window. It's a window from the northern part of India. Why the architect put that one, I don't know. That's why I'm saying it's eclectic. The style is eclectic, because now from India, you suddenly have that window there, and the one who put it there is an architect from New Zealand who had studied in Rome. Okay. So influences came from all over. Buildings like the Supreme Court, or what used to be the High Court, and the Government House, State House, they were built by an Englishman. They were designed by an Englishman, Sir Herbert Baker, who built for the empire in many places. He's the one who designed the Union buildings in Pretoria. He's the one who designed buildings in India. Yeah, he was
an architect
of the empire. So you'll have his style repeated all over the empire.
And then what would you say about today's architecture of Nairobi? Like the way it has revolved, let's say from the 80s,
well,
70s?
70s it was quite modern. Today it's very postmodern. In the place I'm calling the new financial district, I don't even know where to enter the building from. Then there's another one in Kilimani. It's full of hexagons.
Yes.
The spirit of experimentation is actually there. I never know what I'll find next.
Right.
And a lot of glass is used.
And they're beautiful. Are they still on glass?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
As in, Nairobi is becoming more beautiful than in the past?
It's difficult to make that kind of a decision.
Not to you?
To me, I find it's too mixed now. I think we can tone down a little. I'm a traditionalist. I like sameness. Maybe when I was younger, I would have been excited by the mix.
We're in this passage, so let's have, we should have such things.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we can't exhaust talking about such a topic. She's an expert on a lot of stuff, obviously. So I think we'll have another session in future, hopefully. Just comment there what you would want to know more about Nairobi, what you found interesting, and any other suggestion you can have to Dr. Muthuma, who's a lecturer at
Technical University of Kenya.
Is it TUK?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll meet in the next one.
Thank you.